Sarah Taylor and Liz Clinton to talk to us about doubling retention with distance learning for NRS 1 and 2 ELLs. So take it away, ladies. Thank you. And
Thank
yes,
you.
please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah said, we are talking about doubling retention with distance learning, specifically highlighting how we can support adult learners through increased access. So really looking at distance learning from the angle of how we use digital instruction to increase student access. My name is Sarah Taylor. I'm from World Relief Chicagoland, and I am our Regional Director of Adult Education. And with me today is Liz Clinton, who is our Learning and Development Manager. And one thing that I really love about Liz's role is the role that it plays in really looking at how to innovate, how we provide adult education in a way that meets real student need in a timely and relevant and accessible manner. And so that's really a lot of what she and I do together is try to think through what can we create and develop, pilot, implement that can help better meet our students' needs and help get them where they need to be. And so one of the things I wanted to just kind of put us on the same understanding is what our audience is for today, who our audience is. While our focus is on NRS 1 and 2 distance learning is not just for English language learners. This presentation isn't just for those who provide English language instruction and programming. This is just a model for how we are providing distance learning. We are a 100% English language program. And so when we offer 75% of our courses by distance learning, that does shape a lot of how we're doing things or the types of materials and resources we provide. But as I wrote on the bottom, if we did this and are doing this with NRS 1 English language learners successfully, you can do this with anyone. And so the audience for this presentation is primarily administrators and coordinators who are looking at designing and implementing distance learning programs, and then secondarily for instructors. We will provide and talk through what this looks like on the instructional end. But if you do have further questions after this, we would love to discuss more how we provide support to our instructors, basic guidelines and structures that we put in place for instructors. We have an instructional manager whose whole goal is providing that mentorship, coaching, and training, especially in that distance learning space. But today we want to focus in on how we do what we do on a programmatic kind of design level. And so now I'll turn it over to Liz to start us off.
Yeah, hi everybody. We are hoping that we will have a few brave souls who will put answers to this question that I'm about to ask in the chat, or feel free to come off mute since we have that ability here on Zoom. We just wanted to start by thinking about what's holding you back or what's holding us back, right? Like from offering online, remote, distance learning classes. If there are things that come to mind that either you've thought about, oh, that would be really hard because of, or that you've heard other people say about online learning, that there are challenges about it, we would love to hear just a little bit about what's the difficulty that either you're facing or what you feel like you've heard other people say about online learning and the challenges that are involved with it. All right, we have at least one brave soul here that says like it feels like it's a really big task to tackle. Just, yeah, a huge lift. Distractions that online learning can have for the students, I'm assuming, right? The students often disappear. Quality of the internet connection, absolutely. Thank you to everybody who's putting stuff in the chat. Really appreciate it. Varying levels of students' digital literacy skills, 100%. Afraid that without speaking their first language, I won't be able to troubleshoot. Absolutely. Not having computer access, Wi-Fi, technology, lack of tech. That's a theme that a lot of you are mentioning. Sometimes you don't know if the students are actually in class. Woo! Yep. 2020 flashbacks maybe for a few people. Technical issues. Absolutely. Thank you guys for all of those barriers, challenges, things that are difficult about online learning. And we really wanted to kind of get those out there because while we're really, really passionate, and if you talk to Sarah and I for very long, you're going to learn that we're really passionate about remote learning and all the success that we have seen. It's been hard won, right? And we really do acknowledge that there are significant challenges that that have required a lot of working around, have required a lot of really thinking about how to develop it and how to offer it in a way that will actually be successful. So you've already mentioned a number of the things here that we have called myths. And so we would love to present this as the idea that these are myths that can be dispelled or that we can kind of like bust. Distance learning just isn't possible for our program. And these are things that we have been told, like as we've talked with other providers or we talked with other instructors, these are real life things that we've heard. Our program just doesn't have tech and we could never afford it. That's legitimate concern. If we could afford it, even if we could afford it, students wouldn't give the tech back. Like, how would we ever manage to allow students to borrow technology? Students just can't learn online, or at least they can't learn as well. Like, it will always be a lesser form than what we can do in person. I think a lot of us felt that way when we were forced to go online during COVID. And maybe some of it wasn't as effective. So there's some real concerns about that. No one will stay. Both the challenge somebody mentioned earlier, I don't even know if they're on the call, that the students disappear, or that even if not during class time that they disappear, they don't have the buy-in that they do of in person. That's a myth and a challenge that we've heard. That the difference between in person and online, the retention will be lower, which I think from the title of our presentation, we've doubled our retention. So we're excited to talk a little bit about that. And another one we've often heard is that online learning is really only effective for higher level students. So both ELL or ABE GED, that really it would only be applicable to them. That's okay, Sarah, you can go.
Sorry. And then also similarly in that vein, like Liz has said, we've been told that's fine for you, but it will never work for us. And I think one of the reasons why we want to be here, and just really, like Liz said, really passionate about distance learning is because we believe that it should work for all of us and that we have this entire untapped population of adult learners in our communities across Illinois who have never been able to access adult classes in person because of so many barriers. And not only that, but now we are in a stage in our society where digital skills integration is no longer a luxury or an option. And because the reason why I say that is because our goal as adult education is to provide resources, access, and learning to help the adult ed population in Illinois to upskill, to advance, to develop economic stability, family literacy, all of these societal and personal needs to advance and to develop self-sufficiency. And that's no longer possible without digital skills. And so it is now part of our responsibility in adult ed to ensure that every class we offer has scaffolded digital skills integrated within it to help our students navigate a digitized society, because there is no escaping the digital world, regardless of occupation, regardless of role. It is all around us. And I really appreciate this quote from IOM that without investments in building digital skills, digital tools risk exacerbating existing inequalities and leaving behind marginalized groups. And that speaks to both the need to offer distance learning for accessibility, but also the need to integrate like hardware operations, scaffolded digital literacy skills, and not just providing here, I gave you a device, it's fine, or here, I showed you this digital tool, we're good. But that space of without investing in building those skills, those tools themselves can even risk exacerbating those inequalities and leaving these marginalized groups like our adult ed learners behind. So the benefits of distance learning that we have seen, really, like Liz said, our enrollment numbers, when we shifted our 100% in-person program to 100% remote, we saw those numbers triple in our enrollment. And then now we've seen increased retention even above our in-person classes. So it's this question of, could we ever make remote learning as good as, or have as good of metrics as our in-person classes? Over the last 2 years, we have actually seen our remote classes exceeding and surpassing the metrics of our in-person classes. So now our retention rates, our EFL gain rates, our MSGs across the board are higher in our online classes than they are in person. And so that's not saying that our in-person classes no longer have value. They do, and they serve a specific purpose for specific vulnerable populations, but our remote classes are excelling and serving a broader population. And really helping students learn. And so it can be done well, and there are immense benefits to it. And it also, because it facilitates flexible scheduling where we can really build our class schedules around shift work schedules where there's no transportation time involved. The student can just come home and not worry about when am I going to eat or when am I going to feed my family. With transportation to and from class as a part of that. It's just, I come home, I open my device, and I can now engage in class, and then I can immediately go about what I need to do next. And so we have found students really appreciate how conducive and integrated their classes can be to their daily lives. And then it provides real-time digital literacy development. So we're not just sitting in an in-person class with a computer doing a digital tool within the computer. And only passively and implicitly engaging with that content. We are actually engaged with the actual digital tool, building real-time digital literacy skills implicitly and explicitly in real time. And as we navigate complications, we have built in the supports to work those out in real time. And then another benefit, which is especially important to us right now and was relevant to us in pandemic times, is the space of, it is a safe space and it creates equitable access. And so again, that space where so many learners came to us who had never had access to an in-person class before, now they do. In an environment like ICE, if they need to shift from in-person to online because they no longer feel comfortable or they feel a lot of trauma stressors, even our legal status refugees who are in our classes no longer felt comfortable in person and wanted to move online. And even the degree to which trauma and stress and fear impact learning, we're also creating a more conducive environment for learning to happen. And so these are a lot of the benefits that we have seen from offering our distance learning program. And so just a brief timeline of how we've gotten to where we are. First, in 2020, our in-person program shifted fully remote. At that time, 70% of our learners were NRS 1 and 2. So we didn't really have an option of saying only these certain levels can go online without losing a significant portion of our program, which would drastically impact our ability to continue providing services and meet our funding metrics. And so we just immediately jumped into the deep end with our NRS 1 and 2 classes by moving them immediately online. And at that moment, we knew one of those barriers to access was technology and hardware. And so we started slowly building a lending library. Then in 2022, and seeing our enrollment triple, we, instead of just shifting classes back in person as soon as we could, we decided, no, all of these classes are happily working in this remote environment. We'll start new separate classes in person and continue to build our remote presence and continue to slowly expand that lending library. Then late in 2022, we determined, we had this question of, do we now just move all back in person or are we going to stay remote? And if we do stay remote, we need to learn to do this exceptionally well. It's not just now we're taking what we were doing in person, but just doing it on Zoom. We need to figure out how do we provide equitable environments that are just as digitally interactive, just as engaging, just as the ability to actually assess student need in real time. How can we do that? And so that's where we dove headlong into a lot of professional development, training, both internally, externally. In 2023, we deemed that year for our staff, our digital literacy development year, even for staff to say, in order for our students to develop their digital skills, you need to develop your digital skills. And so really thinking through that scaffolded approach we had for our students and how we built that in for our instructional and support staff as well. And then we just continue to see NRS 1 and 2 students wanting remote classes and continually to exceed the caps that we have on our classes. So our online classes have a cap of 30, some have a cap of 35, and we were exceeding that. And so we've continued to expand our NRS 1 and 2 classes and continue to see excellent EFL gains in those spaces. And then just this year, we made the decision to replace WhatsApp with Seesaw, which is typically a K-5 school communication and school learning platform, but we've adapted it for our adult learning population and are incredibly happy with how that's going and the way that it's replaced that space. And so we continue to build in supports to make distance learning more accessible and more engaging. And then now this year, we've also decided to scaffold our lending library so that based on your level, you get a certain type of device so that you are learning to navigate harder devices with increasing complexity as you also grow in your language skills. And that map pairs with our digital skills and digital literacy scaffolded approach as well. So that's just a brief timeline of how we got to where we are. And then the guiding principles that really, as we look at the space of, are we going to stay remote? If we do, it has to be good and sustainable and effective. And so really leaning into the 6 pillars for exemplary teaching from TESOL International, which while it's on a TESOL page, it's actually just 6 pillars for exemplary teaching for adult learners, because so it can be applied to any type of learning that we do, and really looking at how do we then adapt that for a digital space? What do all of these principles look like in a distance learning environment? And then to answer that question and really build those classes, we looked at the Digital Skills for Digital Resilience framework from World Ed and Maryland's Digital Literacy framework, both of which are exceptional. And I've linked them in here so I can share out this PowerPoint resource at the end, and you can have that as a guide too. But that's what really helps to really as an accountability measure for us to make sure that the content we were providing and the way that we were wrapping around supports really met learner needs and met evidence-based practices and the research that shows how to really provide this with excellence. So the last piece is this question of NRS-1 though. Distance learning with NRS students, are you crazy? Yes, we are probably very crazy. And we know that, but that's probably why we work in the environment that we work in. And yet it works and it's working really well and we continue to build it out. And the next piece of this whole presentation is really looking at how have we made it work well? And that's really with that space of wraparound supports, because just like we have wraparound supports for in-person classes, we have to be thinking about what are the wraparound supports needed for distance learning, because they are there. And Liz will talk through each of these different points in detail, but those wraparound supports are really looking at how do we onboard, how do we provide orientations and training for the students, providing uniform technology, Zoom and Seesaw orientations, still having paper tactile resources to still create that neurocognitive connection to being in a classroom space and to help that processing and learning to happen. And then creating really interactive PowerPoints, digital interactives, demonstrations, and looking at in an NRS-1 space where repetition is key and visuals are key. What do we do? How do we implement that same method and thinking about how to serve the NRS-1 learner in a digital space? And so that's what Liz will now launch into to see how we've been able to serve so many NRS-1 students with so many EFL games in a distance space.
Yeah. So as Sarah just let in, that we really found over those 5 years on that timeline that supports are critical, that wraparound supports really are the lifeline to students, because those things that you just named earlier and the things that we're just about to talk about are significant barriers. And that while instructors can do amazing, amazing things and the instructional quality can be, just out of this world, if you cannot address the technology issues, that really hampers learning. Sarah, you can move forward. And so these barriers that you all mentioned are legitimate, right? There's hardware barriers as far as like if a student doesn't have a device outside of their phone. There are Wi-Fi that you all mentioned, right? Like if they don't have home Wi-Fi or reliable, consistent Wi-Fi, that's significant for them to be able to join a remote class. And then do they have the skills to operate maybe that hardware? So say there is a laptop that's in the house, but it's mostly used by the kids and mom and dad don't really know how to use it. And then of course, beyond even just the hardware skills, there's the actual digital literacy skills. Do you really know how to navigate digital environments? Do you know how to analyze what's there and be able to make inferences? And then you have the learning skills. So particularly for NRS level 1, if they don't have like school learning skills or maybe like organizational skills, that's going to make it much more difficult or doubly difficult because they're doing it in a remote setting. So now they're at home and they don't have the good organizational skills, and they're having to navigate maybe multiple, digital environments, and that is significant. Those are very real, very things that we've experienced in our program, and maybe you have experienced in yours. So in order to address that, the wraparound services that we have created that we feel like are really vital include an orientation for remote learning for all students. And then I'll talk about in just a second, a digital intensive that takes it the next level for NRS level 1 students. But for any level, like Sarah mentioned, we have all 70% of our classes are remote, and that is all levels. So all NRS levels are available online. And so every student receives an orientation for that remote learning. And that's provided before the first day of class. They're given their Zoom link, and they are given a translated, recorded orientation that includes all the things we would already include in our orientation. So what is the classroom expectations? What are the attendance expectations? How do you, how do you advance through our program? Like you're taking this level class now, but as you move forward, there are these other like elective classes that are available to you, or these bridges or these ICAPs. And so we always want to present students with their like path for advancement. We also talk to them about progress testing, post-test, which some programs call post-testing, and what's expected of them there, how that will work. We also, so we include all of that, how to learn a language. Those are things that are always in our orientation, but we specifically focus uh, also for our remote students on the online piece so that we are explicitly training them on how to navigate their online class. That includes how to learn online, how to have Zoom etiquette, what's an appropriate way to interact with your classmates and your teacher, and how do you communicate with your teacher or your class over Seesaw? Because you're not in person. You're not able to just ask your teacher a question. And then also we explain to them their option of borrowing a device, borrowing a hotspot, and being able to come in for tech appointments if they have any issues going forward. And like I said, all of this is recorded and translated into our 7 most common languages that we've identified between our students. We collect their second and third languages as well. And between those, the 7 languages we have right now really cover the far, far, far majority of our students. And then for our NRS level 1 students, we take it a next level a next level deeper for them. We require a digital learning intensive for all level 1 students. We also require them to borrow an iPad from our lending library. One of the reasons that we do that is because the iPad can be, we have all of the settings set. We have all of the apps and everything done in a way that minimizes the issues, the technical issues, and that students can't just accidentally, mess the settings up. And so that really removes a lot of the technical problems. It also gives them a uniform device because when we first started online, students were joining with whatever device they had. And as I'm sure all of us have learned over time, they all work differently. You try to send maybe like a Google form or some sort of other digital activity, and this student can open it and this student cannot. And you're really trying hard to figure out why. Well, this eliminates that. So we have a uniform device that's been preset. And then we have this digital intensive that's given by a digital literacy specialist. And we do it with interpretation. That can be sometimes an in-person interpreter, but often it is an online interpreter through a program we use called Boost Lingo. Sometimes it's given in a 3-hour in-person group setting, and sometimes it's done in a one-on-one setting, but it's always done individually with the student and with interpretation. And during that time, we cover things like their hardware operations. So, okay, you're borrowing this iPad. Here's how you use it. Here's how you turn it on, how you turn it off, how you connect it to Wi-Fi, how you maybe like use all the apps on it. We also practice joining Zoom from it, how to mute, how to unmute. And so that during that time, the goal is that it is very experiential and that the student leaves really knowing how to do it and doing it. Not just being told how to do it, but they are doing it by the time that they leave. You can go ahead, Sarah. One of the key things, and I think this is something somebody mentioned in the chat earlier, I think around distractions, is that we have really focused, both for NRS level 1, but really all of our remote classes, we have really focused on encouraging students to create a space for themselves for learning. We have also, as part of that, really discouraged students to learn from their phone because we have built up our lending library. We really have tried to communicate to them the learning that can happen on your phone is much less quality than what can learn if you come in and you borrow a device. Because that little screen, as we know, is really difficult. And so we try, it's not a requirement that they can't join from their phone, but we really, really try to make sure that they are not joining from a phone, that they have a much larger screen. Because again, we're aiming for quality that would equal in-person learning. And so that physical environment really does matter. And we really focus on integrating their explicit digital skills training. And then we have all this implicit supports that Sarah's going to talk about in a little bit. And then we really have tried hard to focus on replicating that in-person interaction and the community bonds that they develop. That was I don't know that anybody mentioned that in the chat, but that was a concern in our teachers in our program, was that they wouldn't have that same connection that they had in person. But we have really found that to be not true. And that the class is highly, highly bonded similarly, and sometimes even more. They always know each other's names, whereas that was an issue in in-person classes that sometimes they knew the couple people around them, but in an in-person class, they know everyone's name because they've seen their name, they've seen their face as the class has gone on.
Thanks, Liz. And as we then move into what does it look like to address those barriers to accessing the class, then we look at how do we design the classes themselves. And to start from that point, I'll just share the types of classes that we're offering remotely right now, and then what goes into designing them, running them, once we've gotten the students onboarded into them. And so to begin, the types of classes. Right now, we offer all NRS levels in leveled individual classes online. So we have a set of in-person classes, but then 75% of the rest of our classes, which include at least one of every single NRS level in a remote setting. And we try to have every NRS level available both in the morning, midday, and in the evening to address different shift schedules. We have many different NRS 1 and 2 classes available AM and PM to address student need. And then we address, and then all of our bridges until this year, every bridge from the very first bridge we ran was remote. This year, our very first bridge was run in person, and it was a sewing bridge because sewing machines. I can't really get around that piece. But every other class that we've offered has been remote. And I really also feel passionately about running bridge classes remotely for accessibility, because if our goal is to help learners, again, upskill, transition into advanced careers, train for advanced careers, many times they have to keep their current job. And so they need to maintain stability at all costs, but while still advancing. And so we don't want to risk that by changing the current structure that's working for them. And so we want to provide these bridge classes so they can start moving toward that career, moving toward ICAPS accessibility, moving toward vocational training accessibility, where then while they're in the bridge class, we are talking with them with our success coaches about, all right, how do we address transportation? How do we address childcare? At what point do we need to get you into a different shift so you can take this ICAPS that's coming up? But we use that bridge as a bridge to bridge them into that space. And so we found that our online bridge classes are incredibly successful and have high turnouts and high graduation rates because of that. For our leveled English classes, We also have a core resource that we've identified works well, again, in the scaffolded approach by level for a distance environment. And so not all resources are the same for what we offer remotely versus in person based on what we find is most conducive to learning in that environment. So for example, for NRS 1 and 2 classes, we use Step Forward, and we use Step Forward both online and in person because for NRS 1 and 2 English language learners, we have found that to be the resource that most specifically addresses learner needs at that core foundational level. And then we provide supplemental resources from Ventures Basic and Ventures 1 that are provided in supplemental packets for NRS 1 and 2 learners. And then NRS 1 and 2, for that remote environment, it is still very tactile and paper-based, even though it's remote. We have a lot of digital interactives, but again, we are scaffolding into it. We're preparing them for it while still giving them something paper and tangible to work with as they are, again, learning how to learn the language and learning how to learn online. And so we're bridging them into that space. So they get a paper book and a paper workbook and a paper supplemental packet when they register for a level 1 and 2 class remotely. They also get a mini whiteboard marker, and a notebook and folders so that they, again, can track their progress and they can see evidences of that right in front of them instead of trying to find it digitally somehow. They see it right in front of them. So again, that's bridging that space as they move into that digital environment. And it's teaching them to engage again with their community as they lift up their whiteboard, as they learn to share things. We're moving them into those spaces slowly. And then for NRS 3 and 4, we use Burlington English, again, with a lot of supplements from Azar Grammar and pronunciation tools that we feel like really help to create a more well-rounded supplemented space for those classes. And then for NRS 5 and 6 online, we use Ventures. And the reason we use Ventures is because we have found that that resource for our learners most specifically addresses the content standards and aligns really closely with them, and is also incredibly rigorous both academically and in a contextual career space. So we have found a lot higher transition rate of moving our students from NRS 5 and 6 classes into community college, ICAPS programs, vocational training, and post-secondary than we had before using that resource. So again, that's just kind of a lot of thought that we put into those specific resources, how, where, when we use them. Online bridge classes, we again contextualize those for our ELA spaces. And then we scaffold them again. So we have some online bridge classes that are for NRS 3 and 4, not just for 4 and above. And then we're building out bridge classes in person for the 1 to 3 space, but really looking at where the content is most conducive for learning. And then in the online bridge space, we're also integrating contextualized digital skills. So it's not so separate for learners as they're navigating how to use these different digital tools. We're showing them how to use that tool in context of that career, and really wanting to explicitly and implicitly teach these tools in context so that transference can happen, because we really want to be moving students toward identifying how they can use all these skills we're teaching them in every arena of their lives. And then we're even building in digital AI, adaptive AI software into our bridge classes. That again is more implicit, and I'll talk about that too right now. And so one of the things that's really also important is understanding that with digital literacy skills, digital skills development, AI integration, there's two different ways to look at that, and really looking at what is your goal. And if our goal is just to use this cool digital tool for helping remote learning, for helping English language acquisition to happen, then we're really helping the language to happen. We're not really building toward digital skills acquisition. In order to build toward digital skills acquisition and really see that digital literacy develop and accelerate, we have to also include explicit instruction so that the learner actually understands that what they're doing right now on the computer with this digital Oxford Picture Dictionary is not just for language. It's also, let me teach you how to use this tool, how to manipulate this, how to elicit information. And so again, that digital skills framework from World Ed and Maryland are really helpful in looking at incorporating both implicit and explicit instruction. So here are just a couple examples of how we navigate that in our digital spaces. So for bridge programming, utilizing adaptive AI software for improved content engagement in bridge programs is implicit. A learner may have no idea that they are engaging with adaptive AI software, but they are. And unless we actually walk them through what is actually happening and what happens when they respond this way, why AI is responding back this way, then the ability to transfer that knowledge into another sphere is limited. But that's not to say that utilizing the AI adaptive software is not helpful. It's still helpful in teaching the content of the course, but not in the digital skills development, if that makes sense. Whereas explicit instruction is teaching students how to use Zoom for synchronous online learning very concretely, very openly. And then implicitly utilizing Seesaw as a tool for homework submission and content engagement is great. But again, the student doesn't necessarily put together cognitively that connection until it's been explicitly taught how to use Seesaw for classroom communication and announcements. And then they can then create this ownership to become digitally resilient to then navigate that app for these different tools of learning. But then now, anytime they see another app similar to that, because we've explicitly taught how to navigate it, they can go forward and start to navigate it in a similar fashion. And so then that's the same thing with any of our digital interactives. I'll show on the next slide all the apps that we use, the different digital interactives we use in our remote learning spaces. But that again is just implicit. And we do provide the explicit instruction in advance, but just using the interactive itself is implicit to support English language acquisition. So both are important and both have different purposes, and they both need to be at play, if that all makes sense. And so how we then implicitly utilize digital tools to maximize engagement, we've used these different apps and different subscriptions to these online interactives to help just create more again, like that space where, let's say, the bonding, where you think about the games and the activities that you do in your class, the projects that you work on. We've found that most of our instructors use these 7 subscriptions the most. And again, these are also leveled. And so not all of our teachers use all of these. Our level 1 and 2 students will use one more than another. Our level 5 and 6 will use one more than another, for example. But Wordwall, Ellie, Kahoots, Edpuzzles, Quizlet, Seesaw, Pace AI are all things that we are using in our program right now. Again, in a leveled way, explicitly teaching how to use them, why we're using them, how they work digitally, and then implicitly incorporating them in a contextualized way to help support the content that we're trying to put forward.
So another really, really important piece is the instructor resourcing. So if you're an instructor on this call, this part is for you. We really found, right, that teaching online is not just an in-person, but you just put it online. It requires so much more digital support for the instructor because, like I mentioned earlier, you try something online and it doesn't work. Your sound is not operating correctly. You're trying to share a video and the sound doesn't go. All of those things. And so we really have found that resourcing our instructors has been key to this success. A few like larger issues to consider is class caps for the instructor. You know, how many students can you really handle at once? A fixed versus open enrollment. We have open enrollment where students can join once a month. But maybe a fixed entry would be a great way to start because you only have to train students and really get them to operate, you know, their online class once a session. And then the length and duration of class time. So when we first started, we thought online classes had to be short because students didn't have their you know, attention span. And honestly, if it wasn't very engaging, of course, the attention span was lower. But as we've gotten better and improved at making the classes engaging, we've realized, and actually it's come a lot from students who were like, why is this class so short? Come on, we can do more. We can do more. And so we lengthened the class times. But those are some things for you to consider if you're in a program where you might just be starting. As far as the very technical resourcing of teachers, we put these in a category called optional but ideal, and we would really say ideal. Having an external monitor, so I don't know what your program, you know, is able to provide for instructors, but having an external monitor is has been very, very helpful because if you can imagine teaching online, or if you currently teach online and you only have one screen and you're on Zoom, it's really hard when you're sharing your screen and all of the faces of the students get really small and some of them are cut off and you have to scroll down. So when you have the external monitor, you can have one for your screen and one for all of the faces. So you really can engage with those individual students. Similarly, having a tablet or some other secondary device we found was really, really helpful for engagement. Because when you're teaching online, and particularly in our experiences on Zoom, and we love to use breakout rooms because breakout rooms make the class engaging and students work together and they actually are using their language. But in order to do breakout rooms really effectively, especially at the low levels, the instructor needs to share their screen often because maybe there's a dialogue on that screen that the students are supposed to be practicing. And since you can't like hand them a piece of paper like you would in the in-person class, you have to find a way around that. So you share the screen in the breakout room. But then, if anybody has experience with this, as the instructor, you can't visit the breakout rooms because then your screen will disappear. And so what we found to work around that is you share your screen through your main, kind of computer or laptop, but we provide a tablet or like in our case, an iPad because it's out of our lending library. And so the teacher can be logged into secondarily. Nothing's showing up. There's no picture, nobody's really there, except the teacher can then use that account to join the Zoom breakout rooms. Go visit, listen, talk to them, turn the camera on and go talk to them. Meanwhile, the screen, that dialogue, maybe that activity is still there. These may feel small, but they make a huge difference in the engagement in the class and in the instructor's ability to effectively teach and try to mimic that in-person experience. Having a mic headset so that the sound is good and the noise suppression is good is helpful. And then a document camera is another one we really wanted to talk a little bit about, which if you're not familiar, you've probably seen these maybe in an in-person class, but our instructors have these as well. A document camera is one where the camera is focused down on the desk or tabletop. And so you can have a physical piece of paper. Maybe you've cut out words and you're all gonna make a sentence together, or maybe there's that whiteboard that you're gonna write and try to model. Especially for NRS level 1, modeling is so important. And if you've taught online, it's a little awkward to like hold it up and model it at the same time. But if you can have that document camera, and you can do such a better job modeling for them. But that's a piece that without that, it can be really challenging. Sarah already talked about the subscriptions to those digital interactives. And so when you put that all together, that's like the resourcing we feel like is really important on the technical side for instructors. And then we've really tried to focus on a lot of training and professional development on how to translate that core resource into the online environment, because it's not just like Sarah said, we're not just putting the class online. It's really, you have to change how you're teaching. And then for students, we've already talked some about our lending library. And so we have right now, as we built up over the last 5 years, we have 550, a little over that in our lending library. Some of those are for CASAS mass testing or our in-person classes, or some that we lend out to instructors. But that is a resource that's available to students, particularly NRS level 1 through 3. And then as Sarah was talking about that scaffolded lending library, once students are up to NRS level 4, 5, and 6, then they receive a Chromebook. And that's because we're really trying to scaffold their digital skills up as they move through the program. And then we have 80 hotspots. So for those students that don't have Wi-Fi at home, we can allow them to borrow one. The first point on here is low-cost devices and affordable connectivity, and that's something we're adding this year, which is connecting students to resources in the community that already exist, where they can purchase low-cost devices or maybe even free Wi-Fi. And so while, yes, we have a lending library, one of our goals is to have digital equity and digital ownership. And so that they would move toward having their own and not always needing to borrow from us, because they will have these digital skills, hopefully, that they can transfer to their own device. And then we've already talked about these, we have these core resources that we give to them, like packets and books, and we give them the interpreted orientations, as well as offering weekly tech appointments, so that if they run into technical issues along the way, which can happen, they get disconnected from the Wi-Fi, the iPad's not charging for some reason, they can just bring it in and have an appointment, have it get checked out, and maybe get that problem solved.
And then we wanted to talk briefly just about the cost. So you might be thinking this is going to cost way too much. There's no way I can do this. And we didn't start where we are now. So we started very simple, very small, with very limited resources. We are a nonprofit CBO, small, very limited resources, but yet very committed to this. And so really working with this very complex web of resources to try and very slowly, with what leftover fringe kind of we had, to really start to build toward this lending library. And then really, again, building out that instructor training. And right now what we have in terms of staffing is we have 2.5 FTE for 1,500 students. And so we have 1.5 digital literacy specialists, and then 1 full technology support specialist who oversees the whole, all the hardware. So about 600 devices in total, oversees all of that, all the maintenance for it, the loaning of it, and then our digital literacy specialists who really work with our students to ensure that they're onboarded well and they're able to maintain their retention in their classes, and that digital challenges don't become a barrier. And then all of the things that we've talked about in terms of the investment in training and support and orientations, those all do have a cost. But we are already paying for enrollment staff and different coordinators and different assessment supports, and different wraparound supports. So even thinking about how do we cross-train, retrain, and reutilize and just pivot to be able to serve more students in a more accessible way by beginning to implement more distance learning in our programs. So ultimately looking at the lending library piece, but again, that space of if we're able to move into like T-Mobile's free hotspots for students and different affordable connectivity and affordable device programs, this becomes less of an immediate need to have a large, robust library. But then definitely having some frame of digital literacy specialists who can really focus in that area. And just some proofs in the data, looking at to date, we have this fiscal year, from August when we started our classes until the end of this semester, we've loaned 413 devices and offered 240 NRS-1 orientations for all of our NRS students in those online classes. And we've consistently, since the last 3 years, seen a 70% EFL gain rate for our NRS learners in those remote classes. So this exceeds, again, our in-person NRS-1 EFL gain rate, and continues to rise. So we're seeing tremendous success in that space. And then we tracked the data to see, and then paired it against, because we're split across 3 programs across Chicagoland, compared the success of our loaning and our distance learning intensive with those NRS students who were not receiving that. And we saw from a 40% retention rate a jump to an 80% retention rate, and we've seen that maintain across the board. So definitely see the efficacy of this, again, wraparound support service model for distance learning to make it effective and to help our program grow and to help our students learn. And so then the question that we end with is, how do we start? How do we really launch and expand distance learning programming, or improve distance learning programming if you already offer it? And that's where we come in. We would love to help and love to be just a resource. And so on the next slide, I've included my email address. You can always send me an email and ask. Liz and I would love to meet with you, talk through, learn about your program, and then even just ideate and give ideas on ways that you might be able to implement more distance learning. And then even how to brainstorm ways to implement more instructor training and scaffold that instructor training in, just as you do with your students. And then the development of digitally engaging resources, and how to even begin building out a lending library. Because again, really, we can't escape this digitized society we're in, and that's not going anywhere. We're just continuing to move in that space, and the expectation that our learners can follow is assumed in society. So really wanting to move them toward that and really wanting to be here to help you because we are very excited about where we are now and the role that distance learning has played in that, and really wanting to support other programs to serve a broader base of adult learners across Illinois. And so now, just with the remainder of time, wanted to open it up to whatever questions there might be. But then again, just that reminder that we're here to support. We can offer consulting services for different programming needs. Or even if you say, well, we're a community college, not a CBO, so this is very different. We would still love to talk about how we've been able to do what we've been able to accomplish and how that could translate into a larger environment. So we'll stop talking now and open that for questions if there are any. And if not, that also then concludes our presentation for today too. Thanks, Amelia.
I have a quick question for you. This is just amazing. So thank you first for sharing. But have you encountered in your lending some of what people said was a barrier at the beginning? Have you encountered that? Have you had a hard time getting your devices back?
We initially have across the board just looked at, I mean, we were, 3 separate locations, DePage, Aurora, and Chicago. And so we've definitely had conversations about how do we get some of these devices back and how do we approach that. And yeah, I'll let Liz, you can speak to that too. But we've had a tremendous success rate in not losing our devices. It's been more on the like, if they're broken, how do we approach that?
Yeah, I'll just add that we had that concern as well, right? Like we were really nervous about if we lend this, expensive piece of technology to you, what's going to happen? And to be 100% honest, we are a fully ELL program, so we only know that experience and in the Chicago suburbs. But we had a very close, like a 99% return rate last year. We had a significant kind of like plan for that. We communicated it. We had, follow-ups. So if people didn't turn it in initially, we followed up with them, but the far majority of them returned it in the time that they needed to, at the location that they needed to. All of our concerns about will they be able to understand what to do and how to do it correctly, and will they be available at the time we're asking them to come, and it just worked. And we've had students this year, to be 100%, transparent, who have dealt with fear with ICE or have moved because they kind of wanted to change, their living situation. And they made sure they returned it before they left. A couple occasions where, quite honestly, if they hadn't done that, we wouldn't have known they were leaving. But they were like, oh my gosh, I have to return this, because their buy-in is so high, right? I think we can sometimes underestimate our students and the value they place on classes, but we've also done a ton of communicating to them about the importance of returning it, about the importance of the fact that we're trusting them with this. And they have really always risen to that.
One student last year even said, I'm bringing this back so that the messages will stop. And so just that piece of really that extra step of communication. And also it helps that our iPads are all part of this management system. So we can shut them down and they become virtually useless to the student if they're not returning it. And so even with hotspot usage and things, if we feel like the student is actually gaming with it and not actually using it in the right way, and we're paying exorbitant costs, we can shut things down. And so I think being able to have that management really helps too.
Yeah, Jody, I see what you put in the chat there, and there's a couple things that come to mind, and you may have already tried these. It's not the easiest, right, to help students understand with the noise. But one of the things within our orientation, and then what we provide instructors for their first few days of class, and then they do it regularly, is to really set the expectation of mute when you're not speaking. And so, and if they're not doing that, the teacher will mute them and try to have a little conversation to say, like, it's not anything personal. I'm just when someone's not speaking, we're muted, because that has really reduced the background noise, because like, yeah, you cannot control what's happening back there. There could be children playing, there could be a TV going, anything. That's the other reason we've worked with them so hard on creating a private space for learning, and that if they don't have one at home, to maybe consider going to the library to reserve a room, or if they have only a home that, everyone has to be in the same room, to try to get as quiet of a space as they can. And like one of the slides in the orientation says, your background should not be distracting. Like, so even if you're in the kitchen and everybody's in the kitchen with you, you need to try to be facing a place that the background is not like kids running around and a TV going. So maybe those are a few things that help, or at least maybe kind of talk about that issue.
Yeah, Amelia, to your point about cameras, we do stress that they do need to be on. And so then a student, if they for cultural reasons are not able to do that in a large group setting, then they communicate that with their instructor. And then what the instructor does is then intentionally place them in a group specific, like the example of Afghan women in our program. We'll place them in a breakout room of just women, but cross language. So they do have to still practice in English. And then in that environment, in the breakout room, they do know their expectation is that they do put their camera back on. And they've been very good about that. And so I think that's, I think just again, that over communication in that space. And we will count students absent too if they refuse to turn their camera on, because again, we don't know if you're here. And then they do know that we have this attendance policy and we will drop you. And so all of those pieces, they're well aware of.
Right. Again, like Sarah and I both have mentioned, I think just that this is trying to equate to an in-person class. So we really do a lot of expectation setting with the students, right? Like, you're committing to this online class, and these are the expectations that go with it, and that we follow through if you don't. And so because it can't be that, like someone mentioned in the chat, that in and out environment. It can't be that you're treating it like it's kind of optional.
Our attendance policy differs based on the length and duration of the class. And so for our AM classes are a certain set number of hours, our PM classes are a different set of hours. And so, for example, our morning classes run 8 hours a week. And so we have an attendance policy that a student can miss 6 absences in a semester without being dropped. And then before we had excused, unexcused, but we just moved into just if you are absent and you have more than 6, really looking at how many times could you miss, how much content would be missed if you missed this many hours of class, this percent of the whole semester. And so really thinking about it that way and talking with our students about the attendance policy from that end too, of we really want you to learn. And we also want this not to be a barrier to other students in the class, because it's not just you learning in this space, it's all of these people learning in this space. And so that's kind of how we approach that, but it is different based on the length of the class.